officers. We will cross the Delaware at night. I to the north with Greene and Sullivan. Ewing will cross at Trenton Ferry, and Cadwallader to the south to surround the Hessians. Knox will provide artillery. We'll place the guns here at the top of town and command the streets. But the Hessians are fierce professional soldiers, hated and feared in equal measure. Washington knows he must take them by surprise. He chooses Christmas Day for the crossing. His password, victory or death. They could not have picked a worse day. The temperature plummets. The Delaware is choked with ice. Sleet and snow make loading cannon and horses nearly impossible. The crossing becomes a physical ordeal in the extreme. In the boats, the men are mostly silent. Thoughts turn to home, and to the deadly Hessian bayonets awaiting them in Trenton. Still, they are prepared to sacrifice everything, because their commander has shown the same courage and perseverance. Washington stands beside his men. His belief never wavers. His stamina is awe-inspiring. The crossing has put them hours behind schedule, and they still face a 9-mile march over frozen mud. Some men have only rags for shoes, and leave a trail of blood in the snow. Meanwhile, Ewing and Cadwallader have failed to cross the river. Washington's army marches alone. 6 a.m. As the army divides in two, Washington and his officers synchronize their watches. 7:30. The cover of darkness is now lost. But by 8 a.m., Washington's gamble pays off. Foul weather has driven Hessian sentries indoors, and the streets of Trenton are empty. American guns roll into position, aiming down King and Queen Streets. The stunned Hessians cannot organize a coherent defense. Sullivan's guns to the west, and perhaps the sound of Ewing's guns on the far side of the river, convince the Hessians there is no escape. After 45 minutes, they surrender in an orchard south of town. The Americans have killed or captured over 900 Hessians, and Washington teaches his enemies and the world a lesson in humanity by forbidding his soldiers to punish their prisoners. Within the week, Cornwallis is summoned from New York, but Washington eludes him once again and thrashes his rear guard at Princeton. In 10 crucial days, Washington has humiliated the British and electrified the colonies. It is a turning point. Liberty, a lost cause only weeks before, is now seen as the rightful destiny of America. Washington proves himself a world-class general, controlling the tempo of war, deciding when and where to fight. When not leading troops in battle, he writes hundreds of letters, raising money, supplies, and more recruits. Washington builds a professional army. He stays with his men at Valley Forge, inspiring them, keeping them alive and in the field for 5 long years. But by 1781, American support for the war reaches a new low. King George himself predicts the colonies will beg for peace by summer. Washington faces a critical choice. Shall he strike British headquarters in New York, or pursue the army now terrorizing his southern colonies? Washington makes his boldest decision of the war, sending a small decoy force toward New York as though preparing to attack. Meanwhile, he quietly turns his main army to the south. Washington stops at Mount Vernon, his only visit home during the entire war, to plan a massive operation. He summons his best men to southern Virginia, where they will join French Admiral de Grasse, who is sailing up from the Caribbean to lend his fleet. The alliance with France allows Washington to spring a deadly trap. Their prey is Washington's old foe, Cornwallis, whose army is dug in at Yorktown, awaiting reinforcements. Those reinforcements will never arrive, because the French fleet will blockade the entire Chesapeake Bay, leaving Cornwallis no escape. The Allies now begin a classic siege. Like a giant chess game, position and strength are key. The British have nowhere to go and few supplies. The Allies have plenty of everything, especially artillery. General Washington himself fires the ceremonial first shot, and the game is on. The Allies dig long trenches, creating siege lines that creep toward the British fort. Heavy cannon and mortars are rolled into position. The siege lines follow a zigzag pattern so the British cannot fire along their length. The Allied barrage continues around the clock for 8 days, pummeling the British. Still, Cornwallis holds out. His last 2 outposts must be taken by hand. Allied guns are now firing at point-blank range. The British are being slaughtered. Finally, on October 17th, Cornwallis sends up a white flag. 8,000 British soldiers march a mile to the field of surrender as the Americans look on. Cornwallis's defeat at the hands of the rebels is an international disgrace. In London, Prime Minister Lord North cries, "Oh God, it is all over." Against all odds, General Washington and his citizen army have outfought the British Empire. Washington is at his peak, but has no desire to exploit his power. The supreme man of action has his eye on a larger goal. And when the treaty is signed in 1783, his final act as general is his most important. He hands the reins back to Congress, assuring a government under civilian control by and for the people. More than his own glory, Washington believes in the Declaration, not as a piece of parchment, but as the promise of a new nation.